Wyoming Territory, 1874. The wind carried dust and judgment in equal measure the day Winona Tate buried her husband. She stood alone at the edge of the dry cemetery outside of Laramie, hands clenched at her sides, her black dress clinging to her thin frame in the summer heat. Her children, Violet and Vernon, pressed close to her skirt, too young to understand why their father was gone, but old enough to feel the weight of what lingered in the stairs around them. She never worked a day in her life, someone whispered behind her. Pretty face, but no good without a man. Worthless now. The words stuck like burrs, but Winona didn't flinch. She had known this town would turn its back on her the moment her husband's horse came back without him. The man had gambled more than he earned, drank more than he worked, and left behind little more than debts and a name that carried no kindness. But he had been her husband, and she'd loved him once. Now she had 2 mouths to feed, no land, no coin, and a town that looked through her like she was already gone. She walked the children back to the small cabin they rented behind the general store. The roof leaked, the floors creaked, and there was only enough food for one more day. She set them down at the table with bread and water, and then sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside her. That night, she heard wheels on the road, hooves on hard ground, and a voice low and steady outside the door. "Ma'am? You Winona Tate." She opened the door slow, her fingers wrapped tight around the knife hidden in her apron. A tall man stood there, dust on his boots, a rifle slung over his back. His shirt was worn but clean, tucked neat into weathered trousers. His eyes were the color of river stone, clear, steady, and tired in a way that said he had seen too much and kept riding anyway. "My name's Oakley Dorsey," he said. "Your husband owed me money." Her spine stiffened. "You came to collect?" "No, ma'am. I came to see if you need help." She blinked. "Why would you do that?" Oakley lifted his hat and ran a hand through his dark, sun-bleached hair. "Because I knew your husband a long time. And I reckon you and those kids didn't deserve the kind of life he left behind." "I do not take charity," she said, voice sharper than she meant. He nodded slowly. "Then let me offer work. I have a homestead 20 miles west. Could use a cook and someone to help tend the garden. Pay would be honest. And the children would have room to run." Winona looked down at Violet, who had fallen asleep on the floor with her thumb in her mouth, and Vernon, who lay awake staring at the ceiling like he was already older than 7. "I will not owe you," she said. "You will not," Oakley said. "You will earn every cent." She took a breath. "We leave at first light." The cabin door closed behind her like the last chapter of a book she never wanted to read again. The journey to Oakley's homestead took 2 days by wagon. The road was rough, but Oakley was quiet and respectful. He helped lift the children up and down, made sure Winona had water, and wordlessly fixed the loose wheel when it came undone outside of Horse Creek. His land sat on a rise between pine woods and open meadow. The house was modest but clean, with a barn, a smokehouse, and 2 horses in the paddock. A creek ran along the back edge of the property. "I built it myself," Oakley said as he helped unload their things. Winona looked around. "You live alone?" "I do." "Why?" He gave her a lopsided shrug. "Never found someone who wanted to stay." She did not ask more. She did not need to. She knew the silence of men who carried grief like stones in their pockets. The first week, she cooked, cleaned, and kept to herself. Oakley left early each morning and returned at dusk, shoulders dusted in sun and sweat. He never expected conversation, but always made sure the children had enough to eat. One evening, he brought Vernon a carved wooden horse. Another night, he handed Violet a bundle of wildflowers without a word. And slowly, Winona's guard began to drop. He built her a clothesline without asking. She mended his shirts without telling. One afternoon, she stood in the garden with dirt on her hands, watching him dig fence posts in the distance. His shirt clung to his back, and the way he moved, steady, deliberate, capable, made her throat tighten. That night, after the children were asleep, she stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed against the chill. Oakley sat on the steps, rolling a cigarette between his fingers without lighting it. "You do not have to keep being kind," she said. He looked up, not trying to be kind, just trying to be decent. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of him. "No one has been decent to me in a long time." He looked at her then, full on. Then they were fools. They were quiet for a while. The stars stretched wide above them. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called out. "You never asked what kind of man my husband was," Winona said. Oakley's jaw tightened. "Not my business." "You are not him. I was not always proud of who I was with him." "You are not who you were," he said. She turned to him, her voice so low it barely reached his ears. "Why are you really helping me?" Oakley's eyes held hers, steady and sure. "Because the first time I saw you, standing in black with your chin high while the whole town whispered, I thought there is a woman who deserves better, and I would like to be the man who gives it." Her heart stilled. "You do not owe me anything," he added. "You do not have to feel anything." But she did. She felt it in the way her chest ached when he smiled at her children, in the way her hands trembled when she touched his shirt sleeves, in the way her body leaned toward his without her meaning to. She said nothing, but she stayed on the porch beside him until the stars faded into morning. And that was how it began. By late August, the wild raspberries behind Oakley's barn ripened under the sun, and Winona began rising earlier, before the children stirred, to gather them in her apron. She baked them into biscuits without asking, leaving a small plate by Oakley's side of the table before stepping back into the kitchen without waiting for thanks. He never said a word about them, but the plate came back clean every time. One evening, as the sun slanted low across the fields, she found Oakley splitting firewood behind the barn. His sleeves were rolled past his elbows, and his hands moved with practiced rhythm. She stepped closer, holding a tin basin with 2 mended shirts folded inside. "You left these in the loft. Thought you might want them before frost sets in," she said. He paused, wiped his brow with the back of his arm. "Appreciate it. Been meaning to fix the tear in the left one." "I did it already." Oakley looked at her, not surprised, but something in his gaze softened. "You always this steady?" "No," she said, setting the basin down. "I had to learn. After my father died, my mother took in washing. I kept the stove lit and the younger ones fed." She hesitated, then added, "He drank too, my husband. Like yours did cards." Oakley leaned the axe against the stump. "You never said." "It wasn't worth saying." He nodded once, slow. "I figure it's worth something now, if you're telling me." She didn't answer right away. Chickens clucked behind the coop, and a breeze carried the scent of pine and old hay. "Violet's been asking why we don't go back to Laramie," she said. "I told her there's nothing there for us. She said you're here, and that's something." "She's right," Oakley said. Winona met his eyes. "Are you asking us to stay?" "I'm saying I wouldn't want you to leave." They stood quiet, the kind of quiet that settles between two people who've begun to understand each other without needing to explain. That night, she laid a second quilt at the foot of the children's bed and stepped outside to find Oakley sitting at the edge of the porch with a lantern beside him and a worn book in his hand. "Thought you'd be asleep by now," he said as she sat beside him. "I sleep lighter here." He turned a page. "Can't say I blame you. Took me a year before I stopped keeping the rifle beside the bed." She looked at the book. "What are you reading?" "Travel accounts. A fellow from Boston wrote it after coming through Cheyenne by stage. Thought he was going to find gold lying on the ground." "Did he?" "He found blisters and a stolen mule." She laughed, the sound surprising them both. Oakley smiled. "You should laugh more." Winona looked down at her hands. "I forgot how." "You didn't forget," he said. "You just needed a reason." The lantern flickered, drawing moths in quiet circles. She reached for the edge of his sleeve without thinking, fingertips brushing the fabric. "I've been waiting for the world to take something else from me," she said. Oakley set the book aside. "Maybe this time, it's giving something back." Her voice caught. "I don't know how to begin again." "You already have." When he reached for her hand, it was slow, careful, not a claim and offering. She let her fingers slip into his, and the weight of it was not heavy, but sure. He didn't kiss her that night. He simply held her hand until the lantern burned out, and the wind carried the scent of turning leaves across the porch. By the time the first frost edged the grass silver, Winona had learned the rhythm of life on Oakley's land. The days began before light with the quiet clatter of the stove and ended long after the sun dipped behind the ridge. Violet and Vernon had settled into a new kind of peace, one that didn't flinch at footsteps or tense at raised voices. The silence in the house now was different. Not fearful, but full. That morning, Oakley rode out before dawn to check the western fence line. He left without waking anyone. Though Winona found the boiled coffee still warm on the stove, and a slice of cold cornbread wrapped in a cloth beside it. She didn't speak of it, but she added more wood to the stove and stirred the stew early. Vernon sat at the kitchen table whittling a piece of pine into the shape of a bird. Violet was on the floor with a patchwork quilt, tying off the corners with bits of red thread. He said I could come help mend the barn roof when the snow comes, Vernon said, not looking up. You'll need boots that hold, Winona replied. He said he had some put by. She nodded once. Then we'll see to the rest. Later, while hanging a length of dried onions in the root cellar, she heard hoofbeats. She stepped into the light just as Oakley dismounted, his hat pulled low against the wind. Fence'll hold another month, he said, brushing dust from his coat. But the trap line's been cut. She narrowed her eyes. Wolves. He shook his head. No tracks. Just wire gone. Clean like a knife. Her mouth drew tight. Someone's been through. I'll ride to the neighboring homesteads tomorrow. Might be they've seen something. She crossed her arms, the cellar door still open behind her. You think someone's watching the place? I don't know yet. But I'll find out. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, she stepped into the barn with a lantern. Oakley stood by the tack wall, oiling his saddle straps. You ever had trouble before? She asked. He didn't look up. A few men tried to take what they didn't earn. They didn't return. She watched the way his hands moved over the leather, methodical, unhurried. You're not like the men I knew. You're not like the women I grew up with. Why is that? He set the brush down. You don't ask for anything, but you give what you can anyway. She leaned against the stall gate. I didn't come here to be saved. I never thought you did. The lantern flickered once, casting their shadows long across the wall. I was 14 the first time someone called me a burden, she said. After my mother took sick. Said I'd never marry if I didn't learn to keep quiet. So I did. I kept quiet for years. Oakley's gaze didn't waver. You're not quiet now. No, she said, almost to herself. I'm not. He stepped closer, slow. The space between them was small now, filled with breath and warmth and the scent of oil and hay. I'd never ask you to be, he said. She reached up, just once, and brushed her fingers along his jaw. His skin was rough with stubble, warm from the lantern heat. I don't want to be afraid of wanting something good, she whispered. You don't have to be, he said. She kissed him then, soft and sure, her hands resting at his collarbone. He held her carefully, like she was something earned, not claimed. When they pulled apart, she didn't step back. Come inside, she said. He nodded once. Let me finish here. She left the lantern burning on the hook by the stall and walked back through the cold, her heart beating steady beneath her ribs. Inside, the fire was low, the children sleeping soundly. She added a log to the hearth and waited. When Oakley stepped in and closed the door behind him, she met his eyes without hesitation. He crossed the room without a word and took her hand in his. For the first time in years, she felt wanted without being owed. And that night, in the quiet warmth of their home, the two of them began something that neither of them had dared to name before. October settled in with a hush, the kind that softened the edges of things. Wind moved through the pines like a whisper, and morning frost clung to the window panes until midday. The stillness pressed gently on the house, but inside, there was warmth enough to hold it back. Oakley came in from the pasture one evening with blood on his forearm and a quiet set to his mouth. Winona was peeling turnips at the table and looked up without pausing. Which one? She asked. Dapple, he said, setting his gloves beside the door. Caught her leg in a gopher hole. Got her calmed down, but the cut's deep. She rose, wiping her hands on her apron. Violet, keep your brother inside. I'll be in the barn. Violet nodded from the hearth, where she was stitching buttons onto an old shirt of Oakley's. Vernon was drawing something in the soot along the edge of the stove. The barn was dim and quiet, the mare breathing slow in her stall. Winona crouched beside her, Oakley holding the halter steady. Was she running? She asked, cleaning the wound with brisk movements. Spooked by something in the brush. I didn't see what. She'll need rest and stitching. I'll hold her, he said, voice low. She worked with practiced hands, never flinching at the blood, not even when the mare shifted under her needle. Oakley watched her with something unreadable in his eyes. You always know what to do, he said. I had a brother who used to bring home strays, she replied. Rabbits, birds. Once a coyote pup, half-starved. I learned quick. He tied the halter tighter as the mare shifted. What happened to him? Died in the winter of '62. Fever took him in 3 days. Oakley didn't ask anything more. She finished the last stitch, wiped her hands, and stood slowly. She'll need to be kept off that leg, she said. I'll stay with her tonight. No, Winona said. You've been riding since dawn. I'll take the first watch. He hesitated. You sure? She nodded once. Go wash up. I'll send Vernon out with your coat. He didn't argue, just looked at her for a long moment before stepping out into the dusk. She settled into the straw beside the stall, the lamp burning low at her feet. The mare huffed, ears flicking, but didn't rise. Winona leaned back against the stall door and pulled her shawl tighter. A few hours passed. She dozed lightly, waking each time the wind stirred or the mare shifted. Near midnight, Oakley returned with a blanket and a second lamp. You shouldn't be out in the cold, he said, crouching beside her. Neither should you. He handed her the blanket. Trade you. She didn't move. I wasn't waiting for rescue, Oakley. I know that. I'm not afraid of hard things. But I've always had to face them alone. You're not alone anymore. She looked at him then, shadows moving across his face. Do you mean that? I've meant it since the day you stepped off that wagon with your head high and your kids tucked close. She leaned forward, her hand finding his. I need to know this isn't just shelter, that it's not just comfort that'll pass when the weather changes. It isn't, he said. I've known a lot of women, danced with some, rode beside a few, but I never looked at any of them and thought, that woman could fight beside me. Build beside me. Not until you. Her throat tightened. I don't need promises. I do, he said. I want you to wear my name. Not because you have to, because it's yours if you want it. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the mare breathing, the wind moving outside like a lullaby. I never thought I'd marry again, she said. I never thought I'd ask. She smiled, small and steady. Then we'll both be surprised. He kissed her there in the straw, no urgency, just a quiet, certain tenderness that settled into the hollows of her chest and stayed there. By morning, the frost had thickened, but inside the barn, Winona was warm beneath Oakley's coat, his hand woven through hers. The mare stirred once, then lay still again. And out beyond the rising light, the world waited quiet, cold, and unchanged but ready to be faced together. By mid-November, the first snow came down heavy and wet, blanketing the pines and weighing down the fence rails. Oakley's land grew hushed beneath it, the kind of quiet that made voices carry farther and thoughts settle deeper. Winona stood at the kitchen window that morning, apron dusted with flour, watching Violet and Vernon roll snow into a lopsided fort near the edge of the garden. Oakley had taken the sled to the creek trail to haul in firewood before the worst of the storm came in. She turned back to the dough, pressing it into shape with steady hands. Her ring caught the morning light, a simple band Oakley had carved from antler until a silver one could be fitted in town. He hadn't made a speech when he gave it to her. Just set it in her palm one morning while she stoked the fire and said, "If you'll have it." And she had. The door opened behind her, boots knocking snow from the threshold. "You're soaked through," she said, not turning. "Only up to the knees," Oakley replied, pulling off his gloves. "Creek's freezing fast. We'll need to cut more before the end of the week." "Put those by the stove," she said, nodding at his coat. "And sit. You're tracking mud." He hung the coat, then stepped close, arms slipping around her waist. "That dough smells better than it looks. You've flour on your cheek now," she said, though she didn't step away. "I've had worse." She leaned back just enough to meet his eyes. "Will you be able to ride out for the supplies before the pass closes?" "Likely. Weather holds. I'll go Thursday. Take Vernon if he's steady enough in the saddle. He'll be ready. He's been practicing without prompting." Oakley brushed a curl from her temple. "He watches everything you do." "I know. That's why I try not to falter." "You won't." That night, after the children were tucked into their quilts, Oakley brought a wrapped parcel from beneath the bed frame. He handed it to Winona with one brow raised. "I was going to wait for Christmas," he said, "but you've never been one for waiting." She opened it slowly, a length of dark green wool, finely woven, with a thin border of embroidery along one edge. She ran her fingers over the stitching. "You made this?" "I paid Mrs. Driscoll in Elk Hollow to teach me. Took me 6 Sundays and a pile of wasted thread." She unfolded it fully, then looked at him. "You stitched my initials. Took me 3 tries to get the W right." She wrapped it around her shoulders, then stepped into his arms without a word. They stood there, firelight flickering against the floorboards, the silence between them full of something known and safe. The next morning, the storm hit harder than expected. Drifts rose against the barn doors, and the trail to town vanished beneath a white sheet. For 3 days they stayed close, chopping wood, boiling roots, reading aloud in the evenings while the windows rattled. On the 4th day, the sky cleared, and Oakley saddled the bay mare to ride out. Vernon stood beside him, bundled in a too large coat, jaw tight with determination. "You mind your mama," Oakley said to Violet, who nodded solemnly from the porch. Winona handed Oakley a satchel of dried meat and biscuits. "Ride careful. I don't want to be wondering what's kept you." "You won't have to," he said, touching her cheek. "We'll be back before dark tomorrow." She watched them ride out, the boy's back straight in the saddle, Oakley's hand steady at the reins. When the wind picked up again, she stepped inside, bolted the door, and sat with Violet by the hearth, teaching her how to mend a tear in muslin without puckering the seam. They returned the next afternoon, cold but unscathed, with sacks of beans, flour, and a bolt of blue calico for Violet's spring dress. Vernon couldn't stop talking about the frozen river crossing, how Oakley had shown him where the ice was thickest, and how to listen for hollows beneath the snow. That night, Winona found Oakley in the barn, brushing down the mare. "I saw what you gave Vernon," she said. "He didn't look up. Figured he was ready. A man's knife means something." "I know." She stepped forward, laying a hand on his back. "So does what you've given me." He turned then, and she saw it in his eyes what he hadn't said, what he didn't have to. She rose on her toes, kissed him once, slow, and held him there in the stillness. The winter passed with long nights and steady work. In spring, they built a new henhouse, added a second room to the cabin, and planted turnips early. The children grew taller, sure. Vernon took to trapping with Oakley, and Violet spent hours in the garden, humming while she worked. That summer, Winona stood at the edge of the field, watching Oakley and Vernon stack hay while Violet traced petals into the dirt with a stick. The sun was high, the air thick with the smell of earth and sweat, and something like contentment. Oakley raised a hand from the wagon and called out, "You coming to help or just keeping watch?" She walked toward them, skirts brushing the tall grass, and replied, "I've been watching over things long enough." He hopped down, caught her hand, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Then let's build the rest of it together." And they did. They built a life with calloused hands and quiet mornings, with laughter that came easier over time, and love that never needed proving. They didn't speak of what came before not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer had weight. Years later, when travelers passed through the valley and asked about the family on the ridge, the woman with the calm eyes and the man who walked beside her like he had nowhere else to be, the townsfolk would say only that they'd made something solid from what was broken. And they were right. Winona and Oakley lived out their days on that land, side by side, through blizzards and spring floods, through births and harvests, through every quiet morning that began with the sound of coffee boiling and the soft, familiar creak of the front door opening to the dawn.